Your voice, your opinion, your community. Fact TV, free speech, protected.
We're here at Village Square Booksellers in Bellows Falls. It's October 18th, Bellows Falls, third Friday. And we're here for our first big fall event with Archer Mayer. And he's been coming to this store ever since he's been publishing Joe Gunther books, I think.
433 years.
Yeah. And I can remember visiting with him in the little store next door when I first moved here. I think I'd been in town for 2 months, and there was Archer Mayer. Little did I know I was going to end up owning the bookstore.
And then I'd still be leaning up against the same wall.
And that I would be introducing Archer Mayer every year. So everyone's here to see you. They're very eager to find out what's going on with Joe Gunther.
I
And
don't look that eager.
yeah.
I mean, look at them, for God's sake.
Yeah.
They're just looking at us.
I know. And Joe Gunther, this is the 30th book in the Joe Gunther series. So that's kind of amazing. So I'll let
Better
you.
not be. I just finished 31, so. Now, I'm actually not going to dominate this. I've been told to shut up after 8.5 minutes of speechifying. But tonight is all mine. So I will speechify for about 9.5 minutes, and then, as you veteran visitors know, I lapse into silence, or I try to, and then questions start flying my way. But I will break the proverbial ice, not to be pessimistic about the upcoming season, by saying that whatever this book is, Bomber's Moon, I knew that was just a trick, is indeed the 30th. It's a brilliant book. There is one problem that Pat did not tell you, and that is you cannot leave the building unless you've bought 4 hardbacks. Just so you know. It's a story kind of chaos in a funny way. In a way, we live in chaotic times, and this one has sort of 3 different zones of operation, if you will. You have a thief who has a brain that so far goes beyond what he practices that he makes everything complicated and convoluted and inside out and backwards just to entertain himself. So where I would, for example, just steal your purse and run like stink. I mean, why reinvent the wheel? This guy, whose name is Alex, who starts the book, he just couldn't do that. He would have to convolute this amazingly complex scenario in order to relieve you of your purse. And it just keeps his brain going. And this is actually based on a real guy, a fellow I met about 15 years ago who was a confidential informant back in the day when I was a cop. And he was charming and incredibly smart, and you just wish he had an honest job, but he just couldn't bring himself to do it. So he kept breaking into your houses and stealing your stuff, and of course now he's in the big house. They call that 3 hots and a cot. So he's enjoying that at your expense. But I so liked the guy, despite his career choices, that I reignited him in fictional form in this book. Then, of course, since this is Vermont, we have a prep school. I had to really scratch hard for that one. So all the prep schools, as you know, are in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, but we've got a couple here. So I went to the financial manager of one of them, and I said, I'm going to create a prep school that is rotten to the core, filled with skullduggery. I'm basically going to burn it to the ground in terms of his reputation. Will you help me? His whole face lit up, and he said, oh, of course, I'd be delighted. That sounds like so much fun, So he told me how to cook the books and carry on in an inappropriate fashion. So we therefore created in downtown Vernon, Vermont, Thorndike Academy. Unless you really hate your kids, don't send them there. And last but not least, of course, it is, after all, subject matter driven books, a murder mystery. And the murder mystery is, actually, I think it occurred, I put it here. I couldn't resist. You know, this is, after all, familiar turf to me. So I killed someone in town, and it looks like a complete no-brainer. So basically, it is what it is, and we all stand around and we look at it, and by the end of chapter 1, it's solved. But is it? Probably not. You know, it is a Joe Gunther story after all. So no, you've got 290 more pages to go, and it wasn't solved. So, but I used some new toys. The State Police drawer was good. Again, thank you, taxpayers, for buying new toys. And so I stole access to one of their toys and put it in the book, and I think you'll get a kick out of that. It's a way of taking a crime scene and rendering it kind of into a hologram, so that you can later, pulling up computers and whatnot, you can sort of revisit the crime scene months and months or years later if you wish. And it's kind of fun. So I throw that into the mix just for your entertainment, or as one of my fans put it, so that they can skip through the hard part and get to the more fun part. These are very quickly read books among some of you. So then also on top of that, since I'm a complicated guy and I like writing complicated stories, on top of those three sort of general areas, I have a vast population of sort of interesting contrasts. So I have very rich people, very poor people, very complex people, very simple people, very all this stuff, because it seemed to me we are living in sort of complicated, contrast radiating times. And I wanted some of the here and now to infiltrate this book in, I hope, an entertaining and interesting way. And so I threw that into the mix too. So suffice it to say, I had fun. I hope you have fun reading it. Some of the preliminary reviews have come through, and the people I paid off said it's a good book. You know, who am I to argue? That being said, I'm now going to lapse into silence so I can find out why any of you came tonight. I wouldn't be here if I were you, but here you are. So I want to find out why you came. Who's got a question? And we'll start this ball rolling. Sir, thank you.
When does Joe Gunther plan to retire?
When does Joe Gunther plan to retire? When I become impossibly rich. Never. Ain't going to happen. No, my old truck finally rusted into the ground, so I bought another secondhand old truck. So I don't know that my material acquisitions are reflective of any large degree of success. That being said, thank you for keeping me alive, but do spread the word to as many of your friends whose last names begin with Spielberg as you wish. It couldn't hurt, you know. Everybody's related to somebody. So no, Joe's not going to retire, but on a more serious note, you know, one of the things I discovered about Joe Gunther was that although I had designed this to be a series from the get-go, because I knew I had more on my mind than a single book would address. I did have this sort of social anthropological interest that I still have very much alive and well, that drives me from story to story to story. But what I didn't anticipate when I started out was that this was going to become bigger than all that. It was going to become, I hesitate to use the word platform because it sounds pompous and self-anointing, but it does become a place from which I can find out what makes us tick. If you look at my resume of firefighting and rescue work and law enforcement and death investigation for the medical examiner's office and all that stuff, plus writing these books, I spend most of my time amid other people's misery, unhappiness, and loss. And I like that. That's odd. Most people try to avoid the world that I go toward. Now, I've retired in most of those. I'm no longer a cop. I'm no longer a responding EMT. I'm no longer a responding firefighter. I'm still, dare I say, alive and well in the dead job. I love dead bodies, and I just can't break that habit. So I still sort of keep current, and therefore I interact with all the guys that I used to interact with before in other guises. I still keep them company on a pretty regular basis. The numbers are climbing for that last job in Vermont, and it pays the bills, it feeds my head, and it also keeps me exposed to those social elements that I would otherwise not be privy to. After all, what's my job is to sit all by myself in a room and make stuff up. That's not a good position for a social anthropologist. You know, I'm going to miss out on what's cooking. What are you guys thinking? Because these books, Joe Gunther, that's you. That's why I don't give them, strange Austrian accents, and I don't have plots that threaten takeover of the U.S. Senate, or nobody steals jet airplanes in my books and then has commando squads chasing after them. None of that stuff happens in my books. My books start with traffic stops, something that every single one of us undeservedly has undergone, and in fact, that's oftentimes how a more in-depth interaction with police begin. Is someone stops you in traffic, and then it's all of a sudden, well, now are you feeling a little wobbly tonight, ma'am, sir? Let's step out of the car, and on it goes. So based on these very prosaic beginnings, I start some of these books, and part of that is because it's familiar to all of us. We've all been there, we all know that, but what we may not know is what lies beyond. Now we can imagine it because it's in the papers, it's in the news, we're aware of all that stuff. So mine is a sort of guided tour to your world. And these names will sound familiar. Certainly the places sound familiar. That's why I knock off a guy in Bellows Falls and you go, oh, I know exactly where he's talking about. That's the whole rationale behind my doing what I do, is because none of this is really too far from reality. And indeed, the policies and the protocols, the laws, the rules of engagement reflect, even the science reflects the reality of the moment. I mean, here's the irony, is I've been at this for so long now that my first book came out in 1988 before DNA. So it was used in this country, right? So the blood analysis in open season is all blood typing. And I had actually gone to the head scientist, the big cheese, who was the editor of the Journal of Forensic Science. And I went down to the University of New Haven, which is where, what's his name, Professor Lee got famous out of. So I interviewed him, and we discussed the case, and he started writing notes on multiple pieces of paper, and at the end of the interview, he just slid all the notes across the table, and he said, there it is. And I actually, in open season, I just put those notes right into the manuscript. Because Joe goes to meet the same guy, he comes back, they discuss the blood analysis, and there they are. And then the very next year, Borderlines comes out. I don't think I have any blood analysis in that, but very shortly, the very next books reflected DNA. And so I've been trying to keep track of the here and now, more or less, as the books have evolved. But as people have pointed out, I'm also a little bit fudgy there. On the same principle that, in fact, if you do the math, Joe is now approximately 92 years old. Are we ever going to really embrace that? No, we're not. So he has cell phones or he doesn't have cell phones, or we do DNA or we don't do DNA. There's a little bit of fudging going on there. as I was mentioning to you early on, someone has rather helpfully approached me and said, you know what, you shouldn't see these as 30 books over 30 years. In fact, it's 30 books over a couple of years. Yeah. And so we just forget about Korea, and you know, I won't mention it if you won't, and on we go. John.
Okay, here's another question about the 30 books. Has anybody done a calculation of the aggregate death toll of all 30 of them?
Well, I wish someone would. I'd be fascinated to know how many people I've knocked off. It's got to be a heck of a lot more than we have actually done in the state. Certainly in the very first books, I reflected on the fact that there might have been approximately 7 homicides in Vermont a year at that time. That is no longer true, nor has it been in quite a while. So while I started Bloody Minded because I had that many deaths within the first 2 chapters of Open Season, I've been fairly consistent. And Vermont has grown ambitions, so we're murdering more of our own than we used to do. I'm murdering probably about the same or fewer than I used to. But aggregate, that's the qualitative word that you employed, and Lord only knows, probably trainfuls of people have gone under my scythe. But, you know, they deserved it all, of course.
No, they didn't all deserve it. You killed off some of my favorites.
Well, you know, if I don't make you like the people I then knock off, well, then what's the whole point of the exercise? You can't just kill people you don't like. I have occasionally killed people you have really had high hopes for. And, you know, here I'll tell you something about that. All right, now I'm going to be dancing around a little bit because not everybody knows the books you're referring to or have read all the books and all that stuff. In fact, maybe 2 or 3 of you have no idea who I am and showed up for a completely different speaker. Too bad. This will be over soon enough. But I write loosey-goosey. I don't do outlines or plots or anything. I don't actually know what the hell I'm doing when I'm writing. But I am sort of in my head following along. And I know that in this particular book, and I'm actually not being coy, I can't remember the name of it, but at one point the bad guy is going to make Joe suffer. But he's not going to do it directly. He's going to eliminate from Joe's life someone he truly loves. And thus, Joe will have to live with the guilt. That was the setup of the bad guy. So he's got a rifle and he's going to do this the old-fashioned way, bang. So as it turns out, he's got 2 targets simultaneously. He's got them right next to each other. And he's got the rifle scope and he can take out one. And we know this. I mean, the scene is building up and there's this element of tension in the... It's kind of like the movie Manchurian Candidate, you know. Is Lawrence Harvey going to squeeze the trigger and where's the bullet going to go? So, little movie reference, probably 3 people understood that. But, yeah. So
you're underestimating the age.
Oh no! I never underestimate the age. Just their cinematic enthusiasms. That's all.
There's 2 Manchurian candidates. There's the early.
Yeah, I don't even refer to the old one. No, I only refer to the old Manchurian Candidate, not the new one. Because I'm an old-fashioned boy, and I look at that first Manchurian Candidate all the way to that famous unfocused photograph that they took of Sinatra when he's interviewing. And the director, this is about as much of an aside as I can possibly cook up, and you're to blame, so beat up on her. At one point in the first Manchurian Candidate, which has Frank Sinatra as the lead investigator, there's a scene that he hits perfectly, but he leans beyond his focus mark into the camera as he's addressing the scene, and thus his face slightly goes out of focus. So the background to this scene was that the director went, God, Frank, That was perfect. But it was out of focus. Do it again. And they did it again and again and again and again. And Frank was a trooper. Despite his reputation, he was actually a really solid actor to work with. But no one was really happy with how he did it subsequently to that one shot. So the director said, you know what? I'm just going to run it out of focus. So if you go to that old Manchurian Candidate movie, there'll be this moment when Frank Sinatra's face goes slightly out of focus. Now you'll know why. Okay. Now, of course, I have no idea what I was saying.
You were pointing the gun at one of two of
Ah,
Jerry's.
thank you very much.
Yeah.
See, you did not nod off after all. So I'm writing this scene, and I've got the bad guy, and he's focused on one of these ladies, and you would think, one of these people, and you'd think that I know what's going to happen. I mean, after all, I am the writer. I'm actually putting this down on paper, quote unquote, as we're going. I have no clue. So I write the sentence, the bullet goes off, and somebody goes down. And I stopped dead in my tracks, no pun intended, because that, now that I thought about it, wasn't really the target I wanted. It was the other person I wanted dead, not this one. And I remember pausing for a moment and thinking to myself, you know what? Live with it. That's life. That's what happens. So you're going to have to live with the consequences of this piece of arbitrary who knows what. And that's true. You know, we've all suffered loss. Every single person in this room has lost a fellow human being due to unexpected reasons or whatever. And that's how it happens. You never see it coming, and then boom, you're done. And similarly, I went, okay, so we're just going to have to march forward. So, hey, all I have to do is hit delete. It's just a sentence. But I took that as law and went forward. Let me tell you, I caught hell after that book came out. You know, emails coming in, I can't believe you did that, you know, you son of a gun, blah, 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 blah. As if I were God Almighty. But in fact, I was victimized like you were. I just decided, okay, that's what life metes out every once in a while, so we're going to have to deal with it. So that's how spontaneous my process can be. And I've concluded books where I had the wrong bad guy. So I had to go back and edit to change it. And the reason I had the wrong bad guy, because I just didn't like the bad guy. I didn't like the weight that person brought. And therefore the conclusion of, you know, oh, there's the bad guy. And I went, there's not enough pathos, there's not enough elements of humanity involved in that. This is a convenient bad guy. So I got rid of him or her and made another bad guy. The only comedic subtext to that was after the book came out, people would come up to me and say, wow, I never guessed that was a bad guy. Me neither. You know, that's the process I like, and one of the reasons I like to then edit the book, because I really don't know what I'm going to have until I finish doing it. Then I can go back, as I am right now in book number 31, and start working it. And that's where Margot comes in very handy, because I throw it at her, she throws it at me, and we go back and forth and back and forth. And she has not been in the woods, you know, either chopping down or growing each tree individually as I have for the last 12 months. I actually keep her in the dark. I don't want her to know what the story is. I don't share the details of it. And one of the huge advantages of that is then I give her this book. Well, you guys have all encountered books in which there have been passages you didn't like. And if you'd had a pencil or a pen, you might have whipped it out and went, gee, you know, you could lose that. And you sort of mutter to the author, well, you know, that was clunky, or I saw that one coming, or that was so obvious, or that was totally inexplicable, or whatever your reservations may be. Well, in my case, I can give it to this highly educated reader who has 3 red pens, and only then I get it back. There's time to adjust and change these things, and the book always will benefit as a result. So it's a funny process. I hope that those little authorial screw-ups are fewer in my books than they might be in other people's books. And I think that process, and I use not just Margot but others, for that kind of feedback before I send the manuscript to New York City. They think I'm a hell of a good writer, by the way. Got them fooled. Boy, I have no idea what stimulated any of that. It was a really good question, John. Thank you. Did you even remember what your question was? Oh yeah, it had to do with cumulative dead bodies. How the hell did we end up where we ended up? Who knew? Ah, well, there you go. So you see, this is light lifting, folks.
So Archer, how do you pick people to be in your book? Because after spending 38 years working in the ER, calling you many, many times to come look over dead bodies.
Yeah, indeed.
You only put one person from the ER in your book.
By name or?
Well, we all knew who it was.
I see. Now, be careful here, because.
Now, and you said
Okay.
it was.
Yeah.
You told us that that's who it was.
Okay,
But we
well,
all-
I may have been lying
No.
because I have a sense of humor. But let me answer in general. The question is, for those of you who may not have heard it, is, how do I choose my characters? Well, there are 2 answers right off the bat, because there are lots of real names in the books. The real names come from auction winners. I don't necessarily, in fact, for I'd say 90 percentile, I don't know who those people are. One of the rules is that I don't want to meet you because I don't want to be influenced by your personality. If you win an auction, you just give me the name, and the second rule then applies because I don't know you. I can do anything I want with that name. I can list you on a tombstone and never have you appear in life. Or I can make you a major character in the book, middle, beginning, and end. Once in 6 blue moons, I'll put one of my kids in a book, just for fun, in slight disguise. Once in 46 blue moons, I might take a real human being that we all like to, want to screw up or whatnot, and throw her or him under the bus. But that'll be deep inside knowledge. But most of the time what I do is that I create characters loosely enough so that all of you know exactly who I'm talking about, and you're all wrong. And the reason for that is that, not in this case, obviously, we'll have to talk later, but because even I know how to spell libel, and we're not having this conversation right now. But one of the tricks to all of this is that I see this as a collaborative art. I am, yes, writing the book, but I'm writing the book with enough creative space in it, enough void, that your imagination and creativity fills in the slots. Who in this room doesn't know what Joe Gunther looks like? Do you have a mental image of what this guy looks like?
Yeah, I think he looks like you.
Yeah, see? Who thinks he does not look like me? Okay, right, all right.
I've heard you say he does.
You're all right, because I never describe him. Not in that kind of detail. What color eyes? I don't know. I don't even describe if he's clean shaven or has a beard. I mean, I don't go into any of that. And the reason I don't is because I want you to do that. And that's just one exemplar of the same trick that I spread throughout all the books. Places, activities, people, environments, even sights and smells and whatnot. I will set things up, but I won't go crazy about filling in the details, because that's where I want you to come in. Someone walks in, even if I describe him or her, you know, blonde or brown hair, I might go that far. But the clothing, Or they might walk in where the clothing becomes relevant, so then I won't describe what color hair they got. There's always room for you guys to fill in the blanks. Except you. Yes?
You are a medical examiner and you're looking at the body. Do you start thinking, you know, how, obviously, okay, how did these stab wounds get in here or whatever? And with this book, do you think that the person who did this, were they smart, were they this, are you thinking when you're looking at a dead person of someone who did this and what they were thinking when they did this? And does that come into play when you're writing books and stuff?
Well, I mean, I try to look in a real case, in a real death investigation, I try to expand my grasp of knowledge as broadly and widely as I possibly can. I want to know that person's entire world. So it may look like a natural death. I'll still go through the whole house. I'll go through relevant parts of their personal possessions and their documentation and whatnot, so that I can get a more in-depth field for that person. Now, that's not just the writer being grubby and inquisitive. This has to do with the fact, okay, you're 104 years old. Your physician said that you had, lung cancer. You've been smoking your entire life. Your dead body has an empty bottle of scotch in its left hand and a cigarette in the other, and on down the line. Okay, so it's walking, talking, and looking like a natural death. I could just walk in, take a look at that, and go, yep, and walk away. But I'm going to roll him over and find the knife in his back, because it turns out his nephew was really impatient to get hold of that 10-year-old Chevy and got tired of waiting. So, boom, knife in the back, and he's got the truck for at least a week before we catch up to him. And why do we catch up to him? Because we were that thorough. The rule in death investigation is always, it's a murder first until proven otherwise. It's just a way to start the process. John?
There's a good segue there, and I don't think I'm creating a spoiler here, but there is a situation in the present book where the death examiner made a mistake. He
Yes.
signed a cremation certificate
Yes.
that turns out he shouldn't have. Has
Yes.
that ever happened to you?
Yes, absolutely. Oh, sure. No, a number of the quote-unquote death investigations that we in the business have to conduct is other people's paperwork. We get called on the docs, and we say to the doc, you filled out the death certificate. I know he was your patient and all that stuff, but we need to interview you to find out more details in your choice of wording and in whatever fingerprints you left on that document, which is the death certificate. Alarms went off in our sort of cumulative head, if you will, because every death certificate goes up to the office in Burlington and gets analyzed, and those guys are very good at smelling out things that don't look quite right. And if they have the tiniest question, they drop us a line and they say, would you mind looking into this? So we go through records, we go through whatever needs to be done, and there's no limit. I mean, if it ends up at an exhumation, we'll do that too. I haven't had to do that, but the world is our oyster in a way. Once that door has been opened, then we have a license to proceed until we are absolutely as comfortable as we can be in reaching a determination. Now, there's that fifth manner called undetermined. I mean, there are lots, well, not lots, fortunately, but there are a measurable number of cases that simply result in a question mark. You just don't know what killed that person. I mean, you've analyzed the tox exams, you've done an autopsy, you've looked at the case, you've interacted with the cops, you've done everything you possibly can, and it's just unanswerable. Well, that's undetermined. Needless to say, we hate that. Okay, so that's the stimulus. And yeah, I have an investigator screw up. Why? Because we all screw up. I remember when I was hired on as an investigator by the chief ME at the time, and he said, "Do we bury homicides?" Yes, but we try not to. and that was eloquently put in his own playful way. And by God, I don't want to be the guy who gets that phone call and says, "You know what? You screwed up." So in answer to your dearest question, when I go to these cases, as I said, they all start as homicides, but I personally, Margot will tell you, I've done over 800 of these easy, and every single one of them has just been wonderful. I mean, I love this job. For someone with my personality and background, it's a natural fit. I find they're fascinating, they're filled with eloquence, ironically, they're filled with life. And you know they say that on TV about, medical examiners and investigators of that sort, we speak for the dead. Well, it's a corny one-liner, but in a funny kind of way, it's not a lie. That guy's not saying anything. And it's up to us if we suspect something ran amiss, and it could be a doctor who gave him a wrong prescription. It's not always a knife in the back. Sometimes it's a hospital having screwed up, or someone doing the wrong blood test and missing something. So yeah, maybe he died of natural causes, but he just checked out of the hospital that morning, and they should have not released him. That happens too. So it's an intricacy of causality that plays into some of these things. So even the easy ones aren't always necessarily so easy. And it's up to you to keep that nose alive and sniffing. It's for me, it's great. Yes?
Is there a model for Willie Kunkel?
Yeah. Deep dark secret. Yeah. Oh yeah. No, Willie Kunkel is inside all of us. He is best kept under control. I work very hard at that every day. But Willie Kunkel is one of the easiest guys for me to write because he's right there. And I am a monument of social self-control. What I truly think, what my outlook on life truly is, you'll never know. But look to Willie for a guess. Joe Gunther, funnily enough, was created because I was worn out when I began to conceive of the Joe Gunther books in the late 1980s. Korea was just yesterday. I thought to myself, I am tired of the hero of a series having to be burdened by some crippling mental, emotional, or physical deformity. Okay, they all have to be recovering alcoholics. They all have to have been, 4 times divorced. They all have to hate their mothers. I don't know what it is. What about making a hero out of a hard-working, decent team player? He's human. He'll screw up. He'll make mistakes, just as John pointed out, the investigator in Bomber's Moon does. But he will atone. He will take responsibility for his errors. He will be big enough to fill the room with his integrity. God forbid we build such a hero. That's what I did with Joe Gunther. Am I that person? No. Are any of us that person? No. Should we? Can we? Do we occasionally meet that mark?
No.
I hope so. I hope so. It's a worthwhile goal. And so I counter the inner Willie with aspiring to have as many Joe moments as I can have in any given day, because that is an honorable approach to living and to associating and corresponding with your fellow human being. Be thoughtful, be nice, be supportive, be of service. When I was a cop, that protect and to serve thing, that was big for me. I was taught early on by a training officer that every encounter with a police officer should be a public relations opportunity. How many of you guys have not suffered the benefits of that? I think a lot of police officers don't apply that. Well, I can't say I always hit the mark, but I always kept that in my head, that if you're going to meet me in uniform or in plain clothes, to which I went fairly quickly in my career, I was going to try to make this a situation where, and it happened a couple of times, not in excess, that as I arrested you, you would thank me. Because it was a curative process, it was a constructive process, it was a process to set your wheels back on the track. That's what it should be. Instead of running around with custom dark glasses at midnight and those tight-fitting little leather gloves and all that other stuff. You know, I understand where that comes from, and you know, you have to work with who you got to work with. But maybe because I came to it late in life, maybe because I carry Willie Kunkel around inside me and I see the value of emulating a Joe Gunther, maybe because of all those things, I tried to be that better cop. And I try to be that way as a death investigator also. When I inhabit your space because of your loss and misery and upset and whatnot, because you're the living person, and I deal with being the translator between the dead person and the family or loved ones or whatnot, I will try, and sometimes I will try very unusual techniques. I crack jokes. I make people laugh. And there's Uncle Charlie on the floor. Why? Because people need an outlet. And if I read them carefully, then I can see ways of lightening that misery instead of just saying, oh, I'm really sorry for your loss. Oh, for God's sake, how many times have we heard that? So I virtually, you never say never, but I virtually never have used that phrase because it's on TV all the time. And it has the emotional impact of a doorknob hitting you in the knee. You know, it's just, oh great, say it with feeling while you're at it. So this is what I've tried to bring these characters to bear for you, the readers. It's probably more psychology than you wanted to hear, but it matters to me that these books, which are oftentimes just seen as murder mysteries, I want to make them for you novels about life, about you, about your lives, about where we live, about who we are, what matters to us. All of that is what I try to stuff into these books. But rather than make them an Oprah feel-good book, I put in dead guys and car chases so I can sell the bloody things and you'll buy them. So I'm a little sneaky. I try to put all this mumbo-jumbo in a pleasant, easy, flowing way. And that's the other thing that Margaret and I will do in the editing process is yeah, okay, the book is done and the plot's there and all that's taken care of. Because these books, I mean, there's a big joke in the world that there are 7 plots. 5, 6, 7. I'm not big on math. And all we've done is just write the same 7 plots, and people joke, oh, that's boy meets girl, you know, blah, blah, blah. It's not far wrong. It's not the plots that matter necessarily. They could be more or less complicated and convoluted and entertaining, like Miss Marple and Hercule Poirot plots are very complex sometimes. But to me, the difference is the humanity. The difference is how the people interact. And therefore, we're not writing whodunits. We're writing why dunnits. And that's what stimulates me, and I hope that's what interests you, and maybe that's what brought you to this room today. Yes, sir.
Well, two characters in your current book kind of get reincarnated, so to speak. I was talking about Sally and Rachel.
Yeah.
It kind of prompts the question of your kind of, I hate to say handling, but or your approach to women in your novels. Would you want to comment on that?
Well, I like them.
I
agree. More importantly, I respect them. I was brought up by them. I came from a matriarchal family in a large way. My father was a lovely guy, but he was never at home. So my mom ran the roost. I'm the bottom of 6 kids, and the 4 of us are women. We were always straightforward, plain-spoken, and more often than not, blunt. So I was brought up in an environment where men and women on that level, if you will, were indecipherable. They were the same people. They were not indecipherable. They were indistinguishable in terms of their gender. And my father sort of imbued that, whether he did it on purpose or not, that there was that sense of your minds first, your brains first, your gender starts below that, but first we're dealing with what's up there. That's with whom you communicate. So the man-woman thing meant nothing to me growing up in terms of differentiation. So as I developed this series of books, law enforcement is primarily male-dominated. Joe Gunther is a guy, obviously, but I tried to make him, along those lines, a hell of a good guy vis-a-vis women, and his treatment of women, his respect, and his expression of those things. Not in a doctrinal kind of way, but just that was him naturally. I wanted women to be able to look to Joe Gunther as the kind of guy they'd like to know. And brother, father, boyfriend, whatever. I didn't care what your image was, but I wanted that sense of moral integrity to translate to all genders among my readership. Now, therefore, Gail Zygmunt, therefore Beverly Hillstrom, and now the second generation, Sally Kravitz and Rachel Reiling, who are daughters of some of those early characters. Actually, Sally is the daughter of a guy. There's no woman who features in that peculiar family setup. Dan Kravitz was the tag man of the book of that title. Dan is so peculiar and so completely unique in terms of anybody I've ever met that I didn't want to expand the familial relationships beyond his one daughter. So there's just him and the daughter. And she's Sally, and she became a private investigator. Rachel, who is Beverly Hillstrom's daughter, became an investigative journalist. She starts as a photojournalist, but I have her developing into an investigative journalist. So there you get these two people, these two young women, similarly aged, but in conflicting, contrasting, not particularly symbiotic, but occupations, but they're sort of on the same playing level because they're both after information. They're both diggers, they're both researchers, they're both investigators, but they're after different things and they play to different masters. One journalism, the other mostly lawyers. So I like that dynamic as well. And just, Margot was helpful in this process too, by saying, bring in the younger generations. Your guys have been around for 30 years. They all should be dead of old age now. Let's start moving in some new ones. And the irony is that just the other day, because I've been doing these pretty much nightly, someone raised their hand and said, well, whatever happened to Joe's mom and his brother? And I went, oh damn, I forgot all about them. Sorry. So I may have to bring them in too, but every once in a while I feel like I'm trying to manage the contents of an airport. Because I got more and more characters and they're all begetting children and the children are coming of age and I just, I need to figure out who's on first and what's on second. Did I address your question? I'm not sure I
Yeah,
did.
well, one thing, I mean, I've only read a little bit of the book, but
Yeah.
Sally and Rachel have one thing in common, it seems to me. They don't accept anything at face value.
Right.
You know, in
I
other
don't
words, you have to prove it to me or show me or
Right.
whatever.
Yeah.
And they're both that way.
Yeah.
That was my.
I think that's just me. I'm the same way. I'm pretty skeptical. I'll always try to be polite. I'll always try to be upbeat and uplifting and supportive and whatnot. But I may not be believing one word that's coming out of your mouth. No. And I had an uncle like that. In fact, he was an entrancing guy to be with. One of my favorite uncles, pretty short guy, an academic. He was a curator at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And very, very, very well known for his incredibly limited academic sphere. I mean, I could literally walk into any museum in the Western world, certainly, and introduce myself, and they would say, "Oh, are you related to Professor Mayer?" Who wasn't a professor, he never even had a PhD. And I'd say, yeah, his first name was Hyatt. Actually, that's what people called him. His real first name, brace yourself, New Englanders, his first full name was Alpheus. I come from that kind of stock. But we all called him Hyatt. And Hyatt was that kind of guy. Well, you would have a conversation with Hyatt, and his entire expression would rise and fall with the emotions in your voice. So you would tell him about some adventure you'd had or something. And this is a guy I knew all my life, so when I was a little kid, and even shorter than he was, looking up at him, I was always completely swept away with the sincerity of his attention. I mean, he's looking me straight in the eyes, and every wrinkle on his face is just attentive to what I was saying. Only later did I find out he was barely listening. You know, so you learn those skills. And it was charming, and I loved him dearly, and I was completely convinced. It's a knack.
Thank you.
Before we vote you off the island, how's the movie going?
Oh, we're getting close. It's a funnily phrased question. We are almost under contract. So people who actually have they have a building and a phone that works, and these are real people, and so they've all I know, you know my history, and they've offered us a very complete contract that's many pages long, because this is all of Joe Gunther. This is the whole kit and caboodle, so we're not fooling around here. Now, it's just an option. Don't reserve your seats across the street quite yet. But having said that, this is a credible bunch of folks, and we are literally down to probably the last paragraph that we're working out language for. So I hope that next month we'll be under contract for the movies, whatever that means.
One movie or a series?
No, a whole series. Be a whole series.
like
It'd be the Joe Gunther series.
Okay, right, better.
Where, how, when, Whoopi Goldberg or not, I can't. That's up to them. But it's legit. It's proximate. And when we talk next year, this should either have gone or not gone somewhere, but at least we've given it a proper swing at bat. So thank you for asking.
And thank you.
And thank you for coming. It was a wonderful evening for me.